I don't know what bothered me more, that I was a failure as a husband or that I was a failure as a father. I don't know if I was depressed or just pissed off. It was incomprehensible, to say the least. I had spent my whole life trying to make things better for my family, and all I ended up doing was providing things and money for them, and it wasn't working. It became clear very quickly that my only function was to keep the well full. I loved my wife, and I loved my children. Note that this was all in the past tense. I have my own business, Enterprise Welding Associates. Terry Martin and I grew up together. We were best friends starting in elementary school. Terry and I started the company right out of trade school, and it grew faster than we could have imagined. So technically, I should say we had our own business. A few years later, we both married our high school sweethearts. Life was good. For the first 15 years or so, everything was great. The business of the company was doing well. Terry and I were both making good salaries, and we had over 30 full-time employees. Terry and his wife Myra had 3 sons. Allison and I had twins, a boy and a girl. We both had modest-sized mansions. We loved going out to restaurants, vacations, and driving expensive cars. Terry and I were very business-oriented. Business came first. We realized early on that it was important to keep our customers happy and our employees happy. A third of our best employees were ex-convicts. We hired them straight out of prison school. In 8 years, only 2 of the ex-cons turned out to be problematic, and they were quickly dealt with by the rest of the cons. They were doing well, and they weren't about to let some scumbags ruin their lives. We supported several community programs and even sponsored a softball team. Unfortunately, my home life was not going well. Somehow, my wife became socially active in several progressive organizations. I wasn't thrilled about it, but she let me do my thing and I let her do hers. Politics had never been a part of our family, but suddenly we started discussing current events and political things that were going on. I tried my best to avoid such discussions, but it was to no avail. The more I shut her out or ignored her, the more determined she became. It seemed as if CNN and Fox News were going at the same time. I started trying to avoid her, but it was difficult. As my wife and I grew distant from each other, so did my children and I. I tried for years to get my son Jacob involved in some kind of activity. I didn't care if it was sports, camping, hunting, or fishing. All he wanted to do was play video games and, as I learned later, occasionally use marijuana. All my attempts were rebuffed, and eventually my wife told me to leave him alone and mind my own business. I would still fight it, but my son smirked when she said that. My daughter Jordan was a clone of her mother. She used to be Daddy's little angel, but now she didn't seem to recognize me as her father at all. I couldn't count all the piercings she had. Even though she was on birth control, it didn't stop her from getting pierced twice. She loved to accompany her mother to all sorts of political hangouts and social gatherings, but wouldn't even think of going out for ice cream or pizza with her father. I gave up trying too. One of the biggest downward spirals occurred when I refused to donate money to the company for one of its promotions. They wanted to provide needles for drug addicts so they wouldn't get infected from shared or dirty ones. Allison didn't speak to me for a whole week. It was hard to imagine that things could get worse. The company Christmas party was approaching. Terry and I insisted that Allison and Myrna take care of it. Myrna was more than happy, but she had to drag Allison kicking and screaming to help her. Over the past few months, Allison had been staying home more and more often. She was also going on sleepover trips to participate in various progressive events. I don't know if they were protests, rallies, or seminars. It didn't really matter. Jacob went from weed to pills. I don't know which ones, but that didn't matter either. Jordan now had his own website with a video camera. Myrna did a great job with the Christmas party. She tried to share the credit with Allison, but Terry and I knew better. We had beer and wine, but no hard liquor. The staff participated 100%. I think the annual bonuses had a hand in it. Allison and the kids were there, of course, but didn't seem to enjoy themselves as much as everyone else. There was no feast, but there was plenty of food. "John, I need to talk to you." Terry tried not to draw attention to himself as we made our way to the side. "What's wrong?" I tried to speak casually to put him at ease. "Jorge Martinez needs to talk to you, but he's a little anxious." "What do you mean?" "Well, he doesn't want to ruin the party and he doesn't want to make you angry, but he feels there's something you need to know." Jorge was one of our former inmates. He had worked for us for 6 years, and we didn't want to lose him. All right, bring him in. That won't be a problem, will it? Terry wrinkled his nose slightly. Jorge and his wife Elena looked a little worried. I smiled and tried to look casual to reassure them. Terry stepped back quietly. Mr. Terrell, we don't want to cause any trouble, but when my wife saw your wife today, she felt she had to say something. I tried to talk her out of it, but she insisted. I looked at his wife and nodded my head as a sign that she could continue. She looked at Jorge, nudged him with her elbow, and motioned for him to speak. Elena works at the Hampton Inn. She is in charge of cleaning on the 5th floor and has been working there for 2 years. Your wife and a Mr. Franklin have been using room 511 once or twice a week for the past year. They usually spend only 2 or 3 hours there and always in the same room. I was at a loss for words. I had a million questions, but I didn't think this was the right time or place to ask them. Elena looked relieved that everything was cleared up, but Jorge was very anxious because he couldn't figure out how I would react. I just took his hand in both of mine, looked him in the eye, and said, "Thank you." I smiled at Elena and motioned for them both to go back to the party. Jorge relaxed. As I was walking out, Terry walked past me. "Give Jorge a raise next month." Kyle Franklin was in charge of the city's parking department. I didn't know him well, but I knew he'd been in public service for almost 20 years. He had intentions of running for mayor someday. He was married to Nora Franklin, who owned one of the top real estate firms in the county. She was a good-looking woman and liked to place her ads on the sides of city buses. I wonder if she had special rates. That night, I got a royal beating from my wife for leaving the party early. The kids weren't thrilled either. I just smiled and went back to reading. Mickey Spillane was still a good read after 70 years. Monday morning, I waited comfortably in the Franklin real estate office for Nora Franklin to arrive. The secretary was making hot coffee, and I had brought the big kill with me. She walked in around 10, stopped, and held her gaze on me for a moment. "I kept wondering when you'd show up, Mr. Terrell. You've been gone long enough as it is." I followed her into the office and took my coffee with me. I guess when you own a company, you can set your own hours. Why hadn't I thought of that? "John, may I call you John?" I nodded approvingly at her. "John, I'm not going to repeat all this drama. I just want to know what you plan to do. I have plenty of irons in reserve, and I don't want you to mess it up." This was not what I expected. I assumed I was in for a great discovery. God, how wrong I was. "Miss Franklin, I seem to have fallen far behind in life. I didn't even figure it out on my own. A friend just gave me a hint. I have no idea what to do next, and I have no one to confide in or discuss it with. Honestly, I figured you were as clueless as I was, too." "John, I've known about this for over 6 months now. I probably should have contacted you sooner, but I had a lot on my plate, and I didn't want you to ruin it by doing something rash. Call me Nora, by the way." "What do you mean, something rash?" "Oh, you know, like attacking Kyle like Rambo in public. Maybe make them look awkward in some way. It's hard to say what you macho men are going to do when something like that happens. I think it's much more effective if you approach it calmly." I've never considered myself macho. "Well, for what it's worth, what are your plans? What can I do for you?" I sank into the chair and sighed heavily. "I think we're going to need more time. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora Franklin and I became good friends. For the past few months, Nora had been systematically framing her husband. The IRS was very interested in his taxes. Nora carefully separated her personal and business taxes from his. The state attorney's office was looking into how he was diverting funds meant for roads and transportation to other unrelated projects. City officials were looking into how he used city funds to rent motels and pay restaurant bills. What was really interesting was that she was able to get them all to cooperate in the investigation so that they all ended up together at almost the same time. However, none of these attempts worked in my situation. She did, however, set up a deal to sell her real estate business, which I found interesting. I could pull off something similar. My main problem was my home and family. I no longer had a close relationship with my wife or children. I didn't want to leave the business, but it was necessary. Nora had a solution. About a month later, I announced that we were going to move to a new house. Allison perked up her ears, but all I heard from the kids was a groan. They loved our mansion. Jordan was interested when I mentioned the pool, and Jacob thought the three-car garage must be nice. The trip to see the new house went well. It was twice the size of our current one and cost twice as much, too. Each of the kids had their own bathroom. Allison noticed that we didn't have enough furniture to fill the new space, but when I told her she could buy everything new, looked happy. She liked the professional kitchen. To top it off, I informed them that we were all getting new cars. For the first time in many years, I was a great father and husband. Nora did a great job finding a new home for me. It only took her 2 days to get all the paperwork ready. When I informed Allison that Franklin Real Estate was handling the transaction for us, she cringed a little, but then seemed to accept it. Nora already had a cash buyer for our old house. I found it interesting to watch my wife and my wife's lover's wife sit down at the same table to sign the papers. There were no fake greetings. We just sat down and started on the papers. The first bundle to sign was regarding the sale of the old house. Allison and I signed everything, which was submitted by Nora and then notarized. We received $450,000 from the sale and transferred it into an electronic account. Allison was feeling pretty good and wasn't paying attention, just signing. The paperwork for the new house was next in line. Allison smiled when Nora said the price was $900,000. She smiled again when I mentioned that I was putting the new house in her name for tax purposes. She thought that seemed like a great idea. What she failed to notice, however, was that it was not a purchase agreement, but an option to purchase. If she had read the fine print, she would have seen that the option was for 120 days. If the purchase was not made by that time, the price would revert to $1 million, and the $40,000 option would be canceled. I hated to lose the money, but it was worth it in the end. After everything was signed and notarized, Nora handed her the keys to the new house and congratulated her. It seemed sincere, and I could hardly keep from laughing. All the way home, Allison was bubbling over. She hadn't expected me to actually put the house in her name, nor did she expect a $10,000 gift card from our local high-end furniture store. Sometimes you have to spend money to earn it. The next day was car day. Jacob chose the Mustang, which I expected. Jordan surprised us all by choosing a lime green KIA Soul. Allison chose a white Lexus. I explained to both kids the importance of taking out a line of credit. They seemed to understand, and it made it easier to get both cars in their names and, of course, fully financed. But they didn't think about the fact that it also meant someone would have to make the car payments. I did the same thing with Allison's new Lexus. I took out 90 days insurance on each of the new cars. The total amount spent on all 3 cars was just under $600. Most of that amount went to pay for tags and titles, another good investment on my part. Within a week, we were already settled into our new home. The more Nora and I worked together, the more we bonded. We met daily. Sometimes I would help her with a project, and sometimes she would help me. We seemed to be very comfortable with each other. Terry was in the welding business, and Nora had enough staff to run a real estate office. All of our efforts were focused on getting our marriages dissolved. Nora planned to wait until Kyle was indicted by one of the organizations that were investigating him. She didn't know which one would get to him first. It didn't seem to matter to her. My situation was a little different. At some point, I decided I didn't want to get divorced. I had too much to lose, but I realized I had to do something. I just wanted it all to go away. Nora came to the rescue again. "John, have you ever been to Aruba?" "Only as a port of call when we were on a cruise, but I've never actually stayed there." "Did you enjoy it?" "I haven't been there long enough to make up my mind." "Why do you ask?" "I have an opportunity to buy a condo in Orangestad out west for $1.2 million. Would you be interested in something like that?" "That might be a little difficult for me. I probably don't need anything that elaborate." "I thought we could do half and half. I'm sure you can do it." "I'm sure I can do it, but you have enough resources to handle it yourself. Why would you even want to drag me into something like this? Think of it as a partnership, an investment, so to speak. I fancy myself a shrewish businesswoman. I enjoy using other people's money, and besides, I enjoy your company." This caught my attention. "Will $500,000 be enough for me?" "I'll have the papers ready. There will be papers, do you know?" "Of course!" I thought it was amazing that I had agreed to live with a woman I hadn't even had sex with. Now I was excited about this whole project. Terry and Myrna were aware of my problems with Allison and the kids. They were willing to help in any way they could, but they were not intrusive. Terry, I've decided I want to sell my half of the business to you and Myrna. That's very nice, John, but there's no way in hell we can afford to buy you out. I wish we could, but you know that's impossible. How about $1,000? You want to explain that? Terry, you don't need me to help you run the business. We both know it's pretty much self-sustaining at this point. I'll be gone soon, and everything will fall on your shoulders. You'll be the sole owner, and you'll make all the decisions. All you'll have to do is call me periodically for advice. Ah, I see, said the blind man. And I assume there will be a consultation fee for that phone call, Terry said, smiling. Think of it as a sort of lifetime annuity. Don't worry about it too much, just make it easy on yourself. We had our company lawyer prepare all the necessary paperwork. Terry and Myrna were a little concerned that I was putting my own spin on things, but I assured them that I had everything covered. It's nice to have a friend you can trust. It seems funny, but I never bothered to check into Allison's affair with Kyle. I didn't feel the need to get incriminating photos, emails, or phone messages. I wouldn't need them. I wasn't going to get a divorce. I was going to do what 21% of deadbeat dads do, just walk away. 2 weeks later, Kyle Franklin was arrested. I don't even know who got the honors. He wasn't a big-time crook or embezzler. He was just a petty official who got his hands in too many pots and spun a shuffle with my wife. Nora and I had long since parted ways when all the dirt came out. She sold her company along with 32 rental properties and 3 apartment buildings. She was set for life. I was her boy toy. That's what she called me, and I didn't find it offensive. After coming to Aruba, we did consummate our relationship, but we never went through the courtship phase. It was as if everything had been decided in advance. I didn't miss my children. Does that make me a bad father? Under the circumstances, I don't think so. I didn't miss my wife. Does that make me a bad husband? I don't think so. Nora started playing golf regularly. She tried to get me interested, but there was no spark. She had a steady group of girls she played with 3 days a week. A few times a week, we got together with them and a dozen other expats to socialize. I adapted to this very quickly. It was a new, carefree way of life, and it was really enjoyable. I decided to take up painting to fill my time. It was something I had always wanted to do. Every morning, I would go to the docks and set up my easel. I was really bad at it. Later, I would go back to the condo, and the first thing I would do was scrub all the paint off the canvas so I could start over the next day. It's been 3 months now, and I still have nothing to show for it. Nora thinks this is very funny. I avoided talking to anyone, but felt I had to call Terry. John, it's about time. I was already starting to give up on you. Have you settled in yet? Settled in and feeling better than ever. This was the best decision I've ever made. We spent the next 10 minutes chatting about my new life in Aruba with Nora. I had no trouble convincing Terry to bring Myrna for a week or 2. Things were going well. Terry apologized for not forwarding the checks for the consultations, but I didn't give him an address or bank account number. I didn't need the money anyway. Terry, I hate to bring this up, but can you give me an update on the status of my wife and family? I don't know everything, but I'll tell you what I can. Things don't seem to be going well without you. For one thing, Jacob has been arrested. He was caught with a couple 100 pounds of fentanyl in the trunk of his car. The car was confiscated, of course, and since he had already turned 18, he was locked up. Allison couldn't bail him out. Nothing more is known about it. I'm sorry to hear that. I know I'm his father, but to be honest, I don't care at all what happens to him. I tried, but it didn't work out. Jordan's situation isn't much better. Shortly after moving into her new house, she doubled down on her webcam site. From what I heard, she had a lot of subscribers, and one day she told her mother she was going to California to meet some producer. 2 weeks later, her Kia was found abandoned in Memphis. Allison hasn't heard from or about her since. I take it that you get most of this information from Allison? Yes. She comes to the office regularly, hoping to catch you. I can tell she doesn't believe me when I tell her you're not here. She was furious last week when she received a notice to exercise the option on the house or vacate the premises by the end of the month. Very clever, John. She was totally confused. Now I don't know what her intentions are. I think some of the utilities were shut off. She couldn't even pay her electric bill. Did you help her? Don't be angry, John. I gave her $1,000 and told her to use it as collateral for the apartment. I'm sure she'll spend it on something else. Myrna felt sorry for her. I chuckled a little. Okay, Terry, I understand. Just take it out of my next order. By the way, can't her lover help her? Terry was laughing now. He's in worse shape than she is. All I know is what we see on TV. He hasn't been news for a long time, but every now and then some information pops up. I think he's going away for a while. Oh, before I forget, Allison's car was repossessed. Since all her credit cards are maxed out, she can't even use Uber. I don't know how she gets around now. We chatted some more about business. Tentative plans were made for an upcoming vacation in Aruba. It was a good conversation. I signed up for an online painting course with a guy from the UK. 2 months later, one of the guys at the marina asked me to draw a picture of his sailboat. Nora is worried that I might cut off my ear. Life goes on.